Ekiti State Governor Kayode Fayemi tests positive as NCDC records 576 new infections. EFCC is embattled and suspended acting chairman Ibrahim Magu accuses Attorney General Abubakar Malami of frustrating transparent disposal of forfeited vessels. In international news, U.S. President Donald Trump says COVID-19 would likely get worse before it gets better. And in sport, FIFA fines Mauritius club for flouting transfer matching system.
This is ANN News.
I am Olajumoke Olatunji. Ekiti State Governor Kayode Fayemi has tested positive for coronavirus. Fayemi disclosed this on his official Twitter handle early Wednesday morning. The governor has now delegated critical tasks to his deputy governor, Bisi Ogbeyemi, as goes into isolation. Meanwhile, Nigeria recorded 576 new COVID-19 cases from 22 states on Tuesday. Lagos regained its status of the state with the highest numbers with 88 infections. Kwara followed closely with 87. The Federal Capital Territory recorded 82 cases. 19 other states also recorded varying numbers of infections. Nigeria's total confirmed COVID-19 figures now stands at 37,801. 805 Nigerians have died so far from the disease and more than 15,000 patients have been discharged. Nigeria now has 5 more testing laboratories located in Edo, Bauchi, Rivers, Abia and the Federal Capital Territory, bringing the total number to 58. The presidency has disagreed with the Senate, asking security chiefs to step down from their positions. It says only the president can appoint and sack service chiefs. But the Senate leadership says the country cannot afford to go on with the increasing killings of soldiers fighting insurgency and banditry in the north. Chairman of the Senate Committee on the Army, Senator Ali Ndume, says service chiefs need to leave their positions for those with new ideas to tackle the nation's security challenges. Early this month, there were reports that 20 soldiers who were returning from an operation were ambushed and killed by Boko Haram insurgents on the Maiduguri-Damboa road. ANN also reported last week that more than 200 soldiers in the northeast and other theaters of operation resigned from the Nigerian army, citing loss of interest. Suspended acting chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, Ibrahim Magu, has accused the Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami, of sabotaging efforts made by the agency to transparently dispose of vessels forfeited to the Nigerian government. Magu made these charges while responding to an inquiry by the presidential probe level investigating allegations of corruption leveled against him by the Attorney General of the Federation, Abubakar Malami. In his letter to the panel, Magu revealed that some of the vehicles recovered by the EFCC were auctioned to the Presidential Villa, the Ministry of Humanitarian Affairs, Disaster Management and Social Development, as well as the Federal Inland Revenue Service and other agencies. The letter was in response to an earlier report by the Presidential Committee on Audit of Recovered Assets, in which Magu was accused of being unable to account for the interest accrued on 550 billion naira recovered funds, as well as recovered vehicles and houses. Magu says some of the houses permanently forfeited by looters to the federal government have also been handed over to some government agencies like the Voice of Nigeria, Northeast Development Commission and the Pension Transitional Arrangements Directorate. Nigeria's tourism and hospitality industry have taken a massive hit from coronavirus pandemic, with players recording huge losses amid growing fears of a looming economic crisis. Correspondent Deji Badmos reports that many businesses that depend on the hospitality industry are currently reeling from the effect of the pandemic.
Nothing better tells a story of the state of the hospitality industry in Nigeria at the moment than Cubana Group, a big player in the West African nation's hospitality industry that has hotels, nightclubs, restaurants, outdoors and lounges. All 11 of Cubana outlets in the country like this one have remained shut for the past 4 months with no end in sight. At this time of the day, this place would normally be filled with guests, eating, drinking and of course having fun. But since the second week of March, when the government shut down the hospitality industry, this place has been closed. Nobody has come here to do anything at all. It's just how bad business has been for the owner.
Wow, the damage is much. It will take a long time, years, if you ask me. But take it from me, a lot of businesses like this, my industry, a lot of people will not come out of it. A whole lot of people. So it has adversely affected us, seriously, in any way you can think of.
With all its outlets shut, almost all of Yegu's staff have been home, over 1,000 of them. And with the COVID-19 pandemic in the country rising on a daily basis, there's no certainty when the hospitality industry will be reopened.
The economy is practically on its knees. It's practically on its knees. People, even when life was normal, things were hard. So imagine like 4 months without job, 4 months without anything. So in my opinion, I feel that we should look into how to run these businesses while being careful, because human life matters so much. Yeah, I agree to that. So as much as they mean well by shutting us down, I believe they should also find ways for us to open businesses.
Nigeria's hospitality and tourism industry together employ millions of people. The country's Hospitality and Tourism Association puts the estimate at about 2.5 million. Almost all of them are now redundant.
By the time businesses even come back, some of these people will not come back to work because they've already lost, because there's no any income. You can't even pay them salary. So how are you going to sustain them? So more than half of that number are going to completely lose their job. And this thing we're still counting because we don't even know when this COVID-19 is going to end.
We have not laid off any human being. We won't do that. That would be inhuman for us to do. You understand? But it has been huge on us. Actually, we are hoping and praying that government will come to our aid, the hospitality industry especially, because we need the support of the government for us to be able to resume operations, for us to be able to sustain our businesses so that most of us don't shut down.
It's now a waiting game for Cubana and other operators in Nigeria's hospitality industry, waiting for the government's green light to resume operations. One thing though is certain, even when they eventually come back, things would not be the same again for their business.
Coming up, African stories. Zimbabwe economy expected to shrink 4.5% this year, courtesy COVID-19. And later, international news. US President Donald Trump says at his renewed COVID-19 daily briefing, the pandemic would likely get worse before it gets better.
You are watching ANN.
Hi, tell them. They told me you are the best around here.
What can I do for you, sir?
I want my own very, very simple. I don't want any shine. If I see any shine.
Actually, I'd love some sequins on my skirt. And I don't like any frills.
I beg, I want frills on mine. But it must not be too tight.
Tight! That tight now, that is what I want. And the transition.
Oh, you know what? I want a gown.
Me too. I want to come to burn.
You know what GMS are doing? Hey, did you capture all the information?
Of course not.
Actually,
fantastic.
I give my customers what they love because everyone has their unique style. So why should they wear the same thing? Just like MTN for me, which gives unique data and recharge offers just the way you like it. Just dial *121# and turn up great offers every day.
Everywhere you go, MTN.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. Even before the coronavirus pandemic, Zimbabwe has had a sustained economic crisis for some time. Severe drought was responsible for part of the problem. Now, economists are saying the country's economy is expected to shrink by 4.5% this year. Inflation levels in the country now stand at 700%. Correspondent Faraya Iwakutuya has the details.
There will be contraction across all major sectors, including mining, which will shrink by 4.1%, manufacturing 10.8%, and tourism 7.4%. Government's response is to maintain fiscal discipline.
When you look at the macroeconomic thrust and framework, it hasn't really changed. I think we are still steeped in austerity. Because when you also look at our COVID-19 health expenditure for the first half of the year, I think we're not doing as well as we should. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult. And the government doesn't actually have the degrees of freedom probably to upscale social expenditures. But I think that's a major challenge now.
Despite the impact of COVID-19 as well as rampant inflation, Professor Mthuli Ncube says he won't require a supplementary budget, which could mean no big wage increase for public servants. They're up in arms after demands for higher pay.
We honestly expected them to loosen things and loosen the bolts and make it a point that they address the demands of the workers. Because as far as we are concerned, workers are at their poorest, their weakest and the lowest ebb since independence.
Government workers say their earnings have been eroded by inflation, which eased marginally to 737% in June. The finance minister is optimistic the retreat will continue to 300% by year end.
He believes that now with the new auction system that's coming in, it's going to stabilize the exchange rate, which will obviously reduce the pressure on prices. And he said that a lot of retailers and business were forward pricing, in other words, anticipating where the exchange rate would grow and therefore pricing their products accordingly. He said that will disappear with the auction as more and more players can access foreign currency in the auction system.
Increased output of traditional grains is also anticipated to subdue food inflation.
Just 3 months ago, Wines of South Africa considered a lawsuit against the government for backtracking on wine exports. The organization said at the time the ban on transportation of wines for the export market has created a risk against the industry's existence. Now, correspondent Sumitra Undu reports COVID-19 has battered that industry.
South Africa has grown its wine tourism industry to be one of the best in the world. But this accomplishment is being eroded with the country under lockdown.
Well, the tourism industry contributes 8.6% of the total South African GDP, and it employs 1.5 million people within the value chain of tourism, of which many of them are employed directly in tourism, which is around 740,000. Impact of COVID to tourism. COVID has decimated tourism in South Africa. And the fact that now we are still under lockdown and it's over 100 days of lockdown, it means that, the tourism establishments have not received any income, because there hasn't been any movement of people.
Wine tourism on its own contributed over $423 million to the economy last year and employs over 10,000 people. Many of these jobs are being threatened by the ongoing lockdown.
The wine industry has been dealt another blow with the reinstatement of the liquor ban. While exports can continue, all domestic wine sales are banned.
We've made provisions for at least 5 to 6 months of almost zero income way back then, in order to sustain ourselves and look after ourselves and still be able to pay salaries and vehicles and insurance premiums, etc. So that is what's our saving grace at this stage. We are already deep into our personal savings. We don't know how long we can continue with that. On top of that, we've got our own rents and bonds and living expenses to cover.
The Western Cape boasts the longest wine route in the world, spanning over 6 wine regions, which include 26 districts and 69 wards. Every year, thousands of local and foreign tourists make their way through the majestic vineyards, but it's still unclear when tourism will reopen in South Africa.
Since the day of lockdown at the end of March, we've had zero income. And we obviously live in limbo. There's no preset date at this stage of when the tourism industry will resume, and we can only hope that it's soon.
Farmers are hoping that the government will allow wine tourism to reopen by September in time for its peak season. Sadly, many wine farmers just won't be able to sustain themselves until then, having been closed for almost 4 months already.
A camp has returned to Paloria refugee camp in northern Uganda, where ethnic clashes claimed the lives of 3 South Sudanese refugees and displaced hundreds. In spite of the calm, UN High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, reports the atmosphere is still tense, but the agency has begun resettling refugees. Hilary Ayasiga reports.
Tensions remain high at Paloria refugee settlement in northern Uganda. The Uganda police and the army have been deployed to restore calm. The recent violence among refugees erupted over theft of crops. The UN Refugee Agency is now offering a safe haven for refugees affected by intercommunal violence and is trying to promote reconciliation through refugee community leaders. They blame the spike in violence on the COVID-19 pandemic, which has affected the livelihoods of many refugee families.
People have lost whatever little opportunities, livelihood opportunities they had. They have lost or already utilized whatever saving they might had. Now they don't have any jobs to support their families, their gardens, and this hunger or, access to food, feeding their families. This is another contributing factor that has, led to the theft of the food, which actually triggered these clashes.
Uganda is home to over 1.4 million refugees. South Sudanese refugees account for 65% of that figure. The UN Refugee Agency is now appealing for more resources so that they can support the refugees.
UNHCR needs $28 million immediately to continue the current level of its operation. And if we don't receive that anytime soon, we might be forced to scale down the current level of operation.
And with this kind of support, they hope to ease tensions in refugee communities.
When we return, international news. US President Donald Trump says COVID-19 would likely get worse before it gets better. And later, sport. FIFA fines Mauritius club for flouting transfer matching system.
You are watching ANN.
We are on the road every day, canvassing throughout Africa for news you really need. We follow the story everywhere, from every corner of Nigeria to the wide African expanse. We bring you what's making headlines. We connect you with news you can use. ANN, African News Network, in a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. U.S. President Donald Trump has not had a daily COVID-19 briefing since April. He shelved the idea of the daily updates after the blowback on his suggestion that Americans ingest disinfectants to treat COVID-19. But the pandemic has worsened in the country since then, with more than 3 million infected and 140,000 killed. Although the president had always downplayed COVID-19, often minimizing the effect and telling his country people it would just disappear. Until recently, he had dismissed the use of face masks, often bragging he would never be caught wearing one. Well, times are different now, and infections and deaths in the country keep rising at an alarming rate, forcing the president to make his strongest statements yet regarding wearing facial masks as a way to help limit the spread of the deadly coronavirus. Nearly 4 million Americans have been infected and more than 140,000 have died from it. The president said the number of COVID-19 cases across the country, quote, will probably, unfortunately, get worse before it gets better, end quote. No medical experts from his COVID-19 task force were on stage with him during the briefing. As the coronavirus pandemic comes under control in China and travel restrictions are eased, the country's hard-hit tourism industry is enjoying a rebound. On Labor Day in May, the signs had begun to shape up as the country launched 80 million tourists. The industry had begun to pick up the pieces.
The Poirier family in Shanghai live a very active lifestyle. They travel around the world every year, but the pandemic has made them change their travel plans for 2020.
I think 2 weeks from now we go to Sanya, and then we are going to Inner Mongolia. I'm sure that China has many beauties that we haven't discovered yet, and places we need to discover.
Thanks to various online travel reservation platforms, the family can make their travel plans and find deals easily.
Being in China, the advantage is, the online system, ecosystem is very advanced, There are plenty of apps, for example, that you can get information with to just understand what destinations could be available and what kind of a good offer and good packages that are available.
Tourism has been hit hard by the pandemic. Cross-province group tourism has resumed in several regions since last week, boosting confidence in the industry's recovery. One of China's leading online travel reservation platforms, Ctrip.com, forecasts tourism peaking in July and August. This has motivated travel companies such as the Fosun Tourism Group to bring new products to attract niche markets into the domestic market.
Chinese customers' needs are changing greatly, especially the young customers. They have a growing appetite for new and unique tourism products. The supply in the Chinese tourism market can so far meet such demand, so more and more people chose to go abroad on holiday in the past few years. We hope this platform will bring them back to the domestic market and attract more foreigners to China.
Experts say the pandemic has changed people's travel habits and reshaped the industry. Travel companies observing epidemic prevention and control measures, along with new products and innovative marketing approaches, will help enhance consumers' confidence in tourism.
They had set out from different South, Central and Latin American countries headed toward the United States. Then COVID-19 happened and they had been stuck in Mexico when its borders with the U.S. were shut as a result of the pandemic. Decision to either return home or wait it out is not an easy one. Correspondent Alex Doyer-Beverstock reports on the plight of stranded U.S.-bound migrants.
Jose Marquina, a Central American migrant, has been in South Mexico for 4 months. He arrived just as the COVID-19 pandemic shut down his ability to travel, either north towards the US or back to his home country of El Salvador, which closed its borders. But he may be stuck in the worst possible place, just a few kilometers from the Guatemalan border, a region that now has some of Mexico's highest rates of infection.
People want a better life, but they don't want to arrive here just to catch the virus and then be sent home to arrive and infect their own families. But when it comes to the virus, those who still want to migrate can do so. It's up to each individual.
At the migrant shelter where he's currently staying, he and his fellow migrants try not to leave. Stepping outside, there's no guarantee they'll be allowed back in. While the COVID-19 pandemic has closed borders throughout Central America, it has by no means put an end to the migration crisis. Gang violence and a lack of economic opportunity still prompt people to flee. And here at Mexico's border with Guatemala, they are finding a country less sympathetic than ever to their plight. Sonia Hernandez is the local mayor and says the migrant issue has made her government's ability to handle the pandemic even more difficult.
Chiapas has the highest rate of COVID-19 cases in all of Mexico, and we are at emergency alert. We don't have any extra municipal budget to be used for migrants. We don't have space in our hospitals, we don't have medicine, and people remain at home trying to recover. That's why we've seen a spike in deaths.
The migrant population in these regions has always been hard to gauge. Their precarious legal status in Mexico compels most to avoid the authorities. And in the middle of a pandemic, society's most marginalized are once again the most impacted.
If it was difficult for a migrant to have access to public health care beforehand, which is a right afforded by Mexico, now it's completely impossible. Right now, they aren't even allowed past the medical institution's front door. Many people are dying, and we don't know about it.
As the migration crisis continues, pandemic or not, the impact of the new normal on the flow of people will be seen for many years to come.
Up next, sport. FIFA fines Mauritius club for flouting transfer matching system. Please stay with us.
You are watching ANN.
Whether in your house, at your office, on your phone or online, we are there. We have the facts behind the headlines. We cut to the chase with the news you really need. We cover every angle. We are the bigger, better news network. We are African News Network. ANN. Watch ANN News on MITV from a truly African spirit.
Welcome back. This is ANN News. In sport, Osun State Chapter of Sports Writers Association of Nigeria, SWAN, is asking the state government to lift the suspension on salaries of Osun United, Osun Babes, as well as contract coaches and athletes. The association described this as a breach of contract punishable under FIFA rules. State sports leaders say the salaries were stopped because football activities had ceased in the country as a result of COVID-19. The Sports Writers Association says this decision is unacceptable because it will only worsen the situation. FIFA has sanctioned a club in Mauritius, say Claire de Yoayim, for failing to use its transfer matching system. The club has been fined more than $10,000 for failing to comply with FIFA regulations governing the recruitment of foreign players after it recruited 5 footballers from teams in Madagascar, but failed to use the TMS for 4 of those players. The club now has 30 days to pay the fine. That is ANN News this evening. Thank you for joining us. For details on these and other breaking stories, visit our website, annafrica.news. Conversation continues on our social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at ANN Africa TV. I am Olajumoke Olatuji. Have a pleasant evening.